Class, when you read and when I read these stories to you and these chapters, I hope that when you do read and when I read them to you, I hope that you care about the characters. I hope that you think about all the details. For example, Sistine, the way that she holds her hands on her hips, the way that she talks very specifically and slowly and gravelly, the way that she glares, the way that she seems to care about Rob in a very interesting way. I hope that you care about Rob and you notice the details about him. The way that he shrugs all the time, the way that he keeps his thoughts and memories and feelings packed away in a suitcase so that they are actually not thoughts. The way that he lets himself get beat up by those boys, the way that he stood up for Sistine, all these little details really matter. And when we think about them, and when we ruminate and think deeply about them, we start to care about these characters. We start to have feelings about them. That's what great readers do. We're going to continue to do that now in chapter 16. Chapter 16. Rob sat out on the curb in front of the motel room and waited for Sistine to come back from using the phone. He had her green dress wrapped up in a grocery bag. He had tried to fold the dress up neatly, but folding a dress turned out to be an impossible task, and he finally gave up. Now he held the bag out and away from him, so that the grease from the medicine on his legs would not stain it. He was relieved when Sistine finally walked toward him out of the darkness. "Hey," he said. "Hi." She sat down on the steps next to him. "How come you don't have a phone?" Rob shrugged. "Ain't got nobody to call, I guess." "My mother's coming to get me," Sistine said. Rob nodded. "Here's your dress." He handed her the bag. Sistine took it and then tilted her head to look up at the sky. Rob looked up too. The clouds had shifted and there were clear patches where the stars shone through. "I can see the Big Dipper," Sistine said. "I like looking up at things. So do my mom and dad. That's how they met." They were both looking up at the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel, and they weren't watching where they were going, and they bumped into each other. That's why I'm named Sistine. "I like your name," said Rob shyly. "I've seen the Sistine ceiling, too," she said. "They took me last year, before Bridget, when they were still in love." "Does it look like pictures?" Rob asked. "Better," said Sistine. "It's like, I don't know. It's like looking at fireworks, kind of." "Oh," said Rob. "Maybe we could go to Italy sometime, and I could show you." "That would be all right," said Rob. He smiled into the darkness. "That tiger can't look up at the stars," said Sistine, her voice getting hard. "He's got that piece of wood over his head. He can't look up at all. We've got to let him go." Rob was silent. He was hoping that if he didn't answer her, she might go back to talking about the Sistine ceiling. "How did your mother die?" she asked suddenly. Rob sighed. He knew there was no point in trying not to answer. "Cancer," he said. "What was her name?" "I ain't supposed to talk about her," said Rob, closing his eyes to the stars and concentrating instead on his suitcase, working to keep it closed. "Why not?" asked Sistine. "Because my dad says it don't do no good to talk about it. He says she's gone, and she ain't coming back. That's why we moved here from Jacksonville, because everybody always wanted to talk about her. We moved down here to get on with things." There was the crunch of gravel. Rob opened his eyes in time to see the headlights of a car sweep over them. "That's my mother," said Sistine. She stood up. Quick, she said, tell me your mother's name. Rob shook his head. Say it, she demanded. Caroline, Rob said softly, cracking his suitcase open and letting the words slip out. Sistine gave him another businesslike nod of her head. Okay, she said, I'll come back tomorrow, and we'll make our plans for letting the tiger go. Sissy, called the voice. Baby, what in the world? What in the world are you doing out here? Sistine's mother got out of the car and came walking toward them. She had on high heels, and she wobbled as she walked in the gravel parking lot of the Kentucky Star. Her hair was a lighter shade of yellow than Sistine's and piled up high. When she turned her head, Rob recognized Sistine's profile, her sharp chin and pointed nose, but the mouth was different, tighter. Good Lord, said Mrs. Bailey to Sistine. What have you got on? Clothes, said Sistine. Sissy, you look like a hobo. Get in the car. She tapped her high-heeled foot on the gravel. Sistine didn't move. She stood beside Rob. Well, said her mother when Sistine didn't move, you must be Rob. What's your last name, Rob? Horton, said Rob. Horton, said Mrs. Bailey. Horton. Are you related to Selden Horton, the congressman? No, ma'am, said Rob. I don't think so. Mrs. Bailey's eyes flicked away from him and back to Sistine. Baby, said Mrs. Bailey, please get in the car. When Sistine still didn't move, Mrs. Bailey sighed and looked back at Rob again. She won't listen to a word I say, Mrs. Bailey told him. Her father is the only one she'll listen to. And then under her breath she muttered, her father, the liar. Sistine growled somewhere deep in her throat and stalked to the car and got in and slammed the door. You're the liar, she shouted from the back seat of the car. You're the one who lies. Jesus, said Mrs. Bailey. She shook her head and turned and walked back to the car without saying anything else to Rob. Rob watched them pull away. He could see Sistine sitting in the back seat. Her shoulders were slumped. A motel room door slammed. Somebody laughed. A dog barked once, short and high, and then stopped. And then there was silence. Caroline, Rob whispered into the darkness. Caroline, Caroline, Caroline. The word was as sweet as forbidden candy on his tongue. I was paying attention to some details that really let me know about the characters, and I felt like I was really caring about them. For example, at the beginning of this chapter, chapter 16, the author explains that Rob had tried to fold the dress up neatly, Sistine's dress. But folding a dress turned out to be an impossible task, and he finally gave up. But now he held the bag out and away from him, so that the grease from the medicine on his legs would not stain it. That detail tells me that he really cares a lot about Sistine and her belongings, and he doesn't want to ruin her dress. He wants to take care of it. He tried to fold it, place it in the bag. He's holding the bag away from him so it doesn't get stained at all. He wants it to be nice and neat and clean for her. So that lets me know about him, and I can see how he really is starting to care about her. Now, here's what I want you to write about today. The last sentence of this chapter is what we call a simile. It compares things using the word like or using the word as. In this case, the word as is used. And the simile is Caroline, Caroline, Caroline. He's whispering his mom's name. The word was as sweet as forbidden candy on his tongue. So you have to answer. Why is that word, his mother's name, forbidden? Why does Rob think that's a forbidden word? But also, why is it sweet to him? Why is it that when he says that word and thinks about it, why is it that it's sweet to him? You describe. Best of luck.